Welcome to Press TV's special coverage of the ongoing situation in Iraq and Syria. As we speak, the town of Abu Kamal in Syria has been liberated by the Syrian forces. This from the Daesh Takfiri terrorists. This is earlier on Monday. We heard the Secretary General of the Lebanese resistance movement, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, speak of the victories against Daesh Takfiri terrorists in Iraq and Syria. We also have now received the letter that was sent by the commander of the Quds forces of Iran's Islamic Revolution Guards Corps, Major General Qasem Soleimani, to the leader of the Islamic Revolution of Iran, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei. Now, in that letter, Major General Qasem Soleimani congratulates the leader on the victory over the Daesh Takfiri terrorists in Iraq and Syria. He hailed the wise leadership of Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, the resistance of the Iraqi and Syrian governments and nation, as well as the resistance movement Hezbollah for their role in defeating the Daesh Takfiri group. He called it an American Zionist terrorist group, saying it was a dangerous group created to trigger tensions across the Islamic world and pit Muslims against one another. This, as we are already hearing of reports from the Kremlin that the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad on Monday visited Moscow and held a meeting with his Russian counterpart, thanking Russia for the role it played militarily and politically in helping the country defeat the Daesh Takfiri terrorists. And Syria is also gearing up for a peace process under the auspices of Iran, Russia and Turkey, as they hold a Syria Peace Congress, hoping to bring together all sides to the negotiating table and hammer out a diplomatic solution to the situation in Syria. Now, we're going to obviously have to wait and see how that unfolds. On Wednesday, the leaders of Russia, Iran, and Turkey, the presidents of those countries, will get together and speak about this upcoming Congress. But, of course, at the moment, victories on the ground give the Syrian government more confidence in being able to negotiate a peace plan with other parties involved. Now, Abu Kamal was a town on the towards the border. It has now been liberated by the Syrian army as well, and right now the Syrian army is also taking part in mop-up operations in Abu Kamal and also the surrounding villages, as they are cleaning those towns of booby traps and chasing away the remnants of the terrorist groups that have fled to the nearby villages. Our correspondent Muhammad Ali is on the ground in Abu Kamal and has filed this report. Take a look.
This is where Daesh's final chapter is being written. Abu Kamal, the last urban and major stronghold for the terrorist group, has been liberated by the Syrian army and its allied forces. Signs of heavy fighting was clear on the streets as Daesh fought ferociously for its command centers.
Effective coordination between the Syrian army and its allies led to the liberation of Abu Kamal town. Daesh used Abu Kamal residents as a human shield, so we faced great difficulties. Our primary goal was to protect civilian lives.
Press TV team toured the town and found booby-trapped gas cylinders, as well as apartments turned into prison cells by Daesh, which used them for torturing and punishing anyone who does not follow its Takfiri ideology. The Syrian army underlined the significance of purging the strategic town.
This town is significant because Daesh asserted existence from this town and came to its end here. It's very important that the terror group was defeated in this town. There is no sign of it here anymore. Its commanders were killed and only there are small pockets of terrorists who are fleeing.
Purging Abu Kamal in Syria and Qa'im on the Iraqi side of the border of Daesh also secures the main border crossing between Iraq and Syria. The defeat of Daesh in Abu Kamal signals the end of the terrorist group in Syria. Daesh did not just lose their last and major stronghold in the country, but also the top commanders of the group. Now, the Syrian army is chasing down the few gangs that escaped away to the villages between Al-Mayadin and Abu Kamal. Muhammad Ali, Press TV, Abu Kamal.
Well, as you just saw that report there by our correspondent Muhammad Ali, who is standing by with the very latest. Now, let me cross over to our panel of guests who are joining us to give us their thoughts of the latest developments on the ground. Let's speak to Jason Unruhe. He's a political commentator and analyst, and he joins us via Skype from Ontario. Many thanks for joining us here on Press TV, Mr. Unruhe. Now, with this letter of Major General Qasem Soleimani to the leader of the Islamic Revolution of Iran, and also, as we heard on Monday, the Secretary General of Lebanon's resistance movement, Hezbollah, also speaking of victories against Daesh on the ground in Iraq and Syria. Both countries now effectively are free from Daesh control of territories on their soil. How significant a step is that, in your opinion?
Oh, this is an astronomically huge step. This is a great step forward towards the eventual defeat of Daesh forces around the world, and particularly within that particular area of the Middle East. This is something that has been needed to happen for a long time now, something that conspicuously did not happen while the United States was carrying out what they called their mission against Daesh. It's interesting to note that as soon as Russia, Iran, Hezbollah and other forces gathered together against Daesh, how quickly they actually fell apart. Yet the United States has been going after them for this many years, but they haven't really had that much success. It's very interesting to note that the cooperative effort between Russia and other forces was far more successful than the operations by the United States, and this certainly does spell the beginning of the end for Daesh forces.
Alexander Azad gone into this conversation. He's a professor of international political economy, and he joins us via Skype from California. Many thanks for joining us here on Press TV, Professor Azad Gad. Now, your initial thoughts on this major milestone that has been crossed on the ground against the Daesh Takfiri terrorist group?
Well, thank you for having me again, Candice. It's always good to be with Press TV. It definitely is a major milestone, as you stated it, but it came at a very expensive price. Syria practically is destroyed, so are parts of Iraq. My forecast is not exactly optimistic with these people. They are like a virus that has been defeated in these two countries, but as you're aware, there have been some terrorist activities in Afghanistan, and Taliban, we have some evidence that Taliban is working with these people. We also are concerned that these people may somehow be active again in the Caucasus region of Russia. Just like a virus, when you stamp it out in one place, it sort of creeps its ugly head in other places. So even though this is a great victory, and for the time being, the danger has been diverted from these two countries, we are seeing all these other signs that are unfortunately very worrying. Also, the very corrosive dialogue and words of war that's coming out of Saudi Arabia, and the threat to Lebanon is also very concerning to us. So we are at a point where their proxies have been defeated in Iraq and Syria, and God willing, very soon in Yemen. But we are at a stage where Saudi Arabia and Israel themselves, because of their proxies having been defeated, may come into the actual scene. And this is exactly what we're seeing.
Right, but Professor Azad Ghan, considering that Daesh no longer is in control of actual territory, and that its so-called caliphate then comes to an official end, that must have some form of significance, strategically speaking at least.
It does. It does have strategic significance, because physically those countries would not, the citizens of those countries, the minorities in those countries who happen to not be Takfiris, like these monsters, are definitely in safety again. And we're hoping for this mass migration out of Iraq and Syria, especially Syria. A lot of these folks from Europe would return and rebuild the country. But Daesh was never about just being a physical entity in one country. It is a very corrosive, dangerous, and toxic idea that if it's not defeated with another idea, then it will be exported and it will be talked away by these monsters at CIA and our 19 intelligence services here. They'll be tucked away just like Al Qaeda was tucked away. My concern is with Al Qaeda 3.0. If Daesh was Al Qaeda 2.0, I'm worrying about what they're gonna present in the years to come in the Middle East. These people need to have. I'm not talking about just Daesh. Daesh has been defeated, but the head of the snake, those two regimes that I just listed a few seconds ago, they need to be truly defeated. I always have said on record that ISIS is Saudi Arabia without an embassy.
Very interesting there. Mr. Unruhe, I'd like to pick up that point that was made by Professor Azad Khan, that it is the backers of Daesh, both financially, materially, and ideologically, that need to be looked at as well. At the moment, Saudi Arabia doesn't seem very pleased with the way things have unfolded in the region now, is it?
No, there's been a tremendous shakeup within the Saudi government and within the Saudi royalty itself. You wonder if this might be directly connected to the events of Daesh having suffered so many defeats. It's very strange. I mean, it's very obvious that ISIS is being funded by both the CIA and Saudi Arabia, and with tremendous connections to Israel as well. It's really a crime against humanity that both of these forces are trying to push this kind of Wahhabism onto the Middle East, simply to carry out U.S., Saudi, and Israeli foreign policy within the region. I mean, it's frankly ridiculous, and they should be taken to the international court for that.
Can you expand a bit more on that, Mr. Unruhe, as far as the Saudi role throughout the rise and the spread of Daesh is concerned, specifically in Iraq and Syria?
Well, Saudi Arabia has always sought to extend its influence beyond its borders. For the last several decades, it's heavily relied on the United States to do it for it, with the minor exception of Qatar, which it's always, to a large degree, projected itself on them. But they haven't had really the resources necessary to be able to radically influence the area around it, other than small acts of intrigue. They haven't had the military forces capable of going into the aforementioned areas. The invention of ISIS as a proxy military for them has been, at least from their perspective, it's been a genius idea. Essentially, they have a military force that they can send in to try to destabilize their enemies, and have enough of a distance from them that they can have some, at least on the surface, some kind of plausible deniability when they most certainly are behind it. I think it does show a bit of a difference in Saudi foreign policy. It has this new tactic to try to project itself rather than a straight up conventional military intervention into many of these countries.
Now, Professor Azad Khan, when we talk of the Saudi role, it's interesting to note that Major General Qasem Soleimani has described the Daesh, the Takfiri terrorist group, as an American Zionist project. What do you say to that? Is there a contradiction between saying that Saudi Arabia is the main supporter of Daesh as opposed to it being a a Zionist American project?
It's all three of them. This is the new axis of evil.
Go ahead, Professor Azad Khan.
Well,
it seems we're having some technical difficulties there with his connection. We'll try and get him back on for you. I'll put the same question to you, Mr. Unruhe, as far as the role of Israel and the U.S. is concerned, because let's not forget the U.S. formed this broad international coalition against Daesh to help Iraq bomb Daesh out of its territory.
Well, ISIS has been a tremendous tool for U.S. foreign policy. It's allowed them to do things that they wouldn't normally do, to attack targets they wouldn't normally have been able to attack. But like with all instances of a U.S. flirtation with radical Islam, it ends up blowing up in their face and becoming a kind of creature that they cannot control. They helped create the Mujahideen in the 1980s to fight the Soviets inside of Afghanistan. And the creation of that organization certainly came back to to bite them with the events of September 11, 2001. The same thing with ISIS. Once they created this organization to attack targets they couldn't normally touch, it got out of hand. The ISIS grew beyond their full control. They lost control of their own weapon, and thus it started to become counterproductive in that regard. So eventually they too had to put effort into shutting it down. It's not unreasonable to see Saudi Arabia and Israel back on with backing the United States on this situation, given that they all pretty much have the same kind of a vision for the Middle East, where they stand in great power over the other countries in the region and essentially exploit them. This is a block of imperialist power, the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia.
All right, now I'm being told Professor Azad Khan is back on the line with us. Professor Azad Khan, when we're talking about the role of Saudi Arabia as well as the U.S. and Israel as far as Daesh is concerned, how do you view it?
Those roles are established. Nobody in their sane mind would argue the role that this, what I call the new axis of, or the axis of evil, being Washington, Riyadh, and Tel Aviv, have been playing. Perhaps for the time being, the concept of proxy war at the expense of hundreds of thousands of people being dead, perhaps for the time being that concept has been defeated. But the danger at this moment is that whenever you're engaged in proxy wars, even though you may lose in that third country, somehow your ego, your hubris, your imperialistic arrogance may not have been completely defeated. And unfortunately, that's what I see right now. Unless we have a total coup against this upstart, Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, then my forecast is dark and gloomy, because they want to actually enter the scene now through vis-a-vis Israel to actually threaten Iran. Now, there's another angle to this, is that perhaps the Israelis and Saudis are looking for a second Iran-Iraq war, in this case being Iran and Saudi Arabia. Perhaps they want these two states to somehow neutralize themselves at a time when Donald Trump has given them $350 million worth of weapons. Perhaps they want lower prices of oil. Perhaps they want these more, the weapons to be purchased by this regime. But it's very, very complicated right now. I am not under the illusion that everything is done and over with. I'm afraid the Daesh, it's a good thing that Daesh has been defeated, so does FSA and Nusra and all these other savage terrorist groups. But we are now entering a new geopolitical phase where the hands behind the curtain are entering the scene themselves, and there seems to be no humility, no sense of acknowledgement of the defeats that they have suffered in this country. Instead, we are seeing a new sort of row of aggression and a behavior that is basically unforgivable. I think for the time being, and we've seen some good developments at the UN by Iran's UN ambassador going on the offensive and trying to actually investigate what really happened with those chemical attacks, which we believe were done by ISIS. We have to go back and set the record clear. We should be on the offensive. We shouldn't really rest right now just because we have defeated ISIS. There's been so many atrocities committed, and they've been hand in hand using deceptive techniques, that we have to go back and completely expose them and reveal their hand. And even then, I don't think it's going to be enough. I think this MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, is an extremely dangerous character. Had this defeat happened during his father or his uncle's times, they would have retreated. But these people are extremely aggressive now, right now. These new cadre princes who really don't know what the hell they're doing. Their policies rather schizophrenic in Middle East, but they seem to be so full of arrogance and hubris that they are not going to acknowledge defeat.
Mr. Unruhe, what do you say to that? Do you think that now, considering that certain players had wanted the outcome of the situation in Iraq and Syria to be extremely different from what we're seeing today, we are going to see the gloves come off and no more proxies like Daesh being used and these players coming out in the open?
I think that's a definite real possibility. There is almost a scale of escalation. There's low intensity all the way to high intensity, and it's going to be whatever it is that's necessary to get the job done. Now, Saudi Arabia would prefer to just have their proxies do the entire job for them, but it seems that this hasn't played out. So they're going to have to take a more proactive role in fighting against the countries whose territorial sovereignty that they are trying to violate. I definitely agree. I think there's a very good likelihood that if this continued to escalate, that you could see the Saudi military itself start carrying out actions against its neighbor. It's a question of how much military power do they really have. A lot of it is tied up with the conflict in Yemen right now. But I definitely do think that they are going to be stepping forward and taking a more proactive role.
Okay, now Professor Azad Khan, we know that the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad met with his Russian counterpart on Monday, thanking Russia for its role politically and militarily in helping defeat Daesh. And also, now they're gearing up for that Syrian Congress that needs to be held to map out a diplomatic solution to the situation in Syria. This is obviously going to be built upon the successes of the Astana peace process, which saw de-escalation zones successfully being implemented in different parts of Syria. Now, at the same time, President Vladimir Putin spoke of how Syria is close to finishing its fight against terrorism in the war-torn country, and he spoke that now is the time for a peaceful political settlement. Will this peaceful political settlement come to fruition? Is it within arm's reach, considering we are seeing changes taking place at the so-called high negotiations committee, that Saudi-backed Syrian opposition group, where its leader has tendered his resignation?
Yes, I think every conflict eventually has a political settlement. My concern is which direction will this political settlement take toward? Will it be global powers in the region who will somehow make a deal amongst themselves at the expense of the countries that paid blood and toil, that literally lost thousands of people in this conflict? I work with the Russians. I'm quite familiar with them. I wasn't too thrilled when King Salman went to Russia and Russians sell them millions of dollars of weapons. We were dumbfounded by that. But then again, we were not, because big powers are only interested in their economic geopolitical interests. I'm a little concerned about the close relations that there is between Russia and Israel, although that's their business. So they have their own interests, and that may not necessarily be in harmony, with the interest of Iran, Lebanon, and Syria. What I'm seeing right now with the Saudis, the development that I'm seeing with the Saudis, I don't believe the Saudis are going to go head on first, into war with Iran. I believe they don't have the guts to do that, and they know that missiles will rain down on Riyadh like no other time in history. I don't believe that's going to happen. I believe they're going to go after Hezbollah. I believe they're going to try to stir geosectarianism in Lebanon, just like they tried to do in Syria, one of the most multi-ethnic countries in the Middle East, as well as Iraq. So I think they're going to go after Iran's allies in the region. They obviously were defeated, trying to defeat Iran's ally Syria. They're going to go after Lebanon, and I think the Israelis are going to try to provide every possible support they can from their northern borders, and that's what really concerns me. But I'm sorry, when it comes to the Russians or other global powers, be it Russia or China or anybody, India or the U.S., I don't trust any of them. I don't think they're going to act in the best interest of the countries of the region. They just happen to be, by some geopolitical karma, happen to be on the right side of history when it came to Syria. But again, my forecast is rather gloomy based on the information that I'm getting from my sources about Russia's intention in the Middle East.
And Mr. Unruhe, same question to you as far as the Syrian Congress is concerned. Clearly, of course, getting rid of Daesh control from Syrian soil is extremely significant in as far as giving Syria that upper hand in those negotiations. However, will it also force the hands of the other parties to want to bring about that political will for a diplomatic solution?
I think there might be that kind of a situation going on. We of course, I have to agree with our guest that sides like China and Russia are not wholly altruistic in their actions in this geopolitical situation. They are, like you said, on the right side of history. But I think in a situation like this, with ISIS so close to a complete and utter defeat, that there may be some kind of negotiations with other powers. Unfortunately, this may not be in the best interests of Syria itself. Syria's independence should be the #1 concern, obviously, aside from fighting Daesh forces. It should be to help Syria get back to as much of a normal state as possible.
I lost the audio again.
About the way things were before the war.
Right.
But I think that there is. Sorry?
All right, I'm going to have to stop you there. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. That's Jason Unruhe. He's a political commentator and analyst, joining us via Skype from Ontario. Joining us via Skype from California is Alexander Azad Khan, professor of international political economy. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for weighing in with your thoughts and comments.